My daughter was 4 hours old. She was on my chest. Her breath was the only sound in the room I could hear clearly, that small, steady rhythm of someone who has just arrived in the world and has not yet learned that it requires anything from you. The machines had gone quiet. The nurses had dimmed the lights. And I was lying in that hospital bed in the particular exhausted stillness of a woman whose body has just done the most extreme thing a human body can do. And I was looking at my daughter's face, and I thought, this is the moment. This is the moment I will remember for the rest of my life. And then my phone rang. The name on the screen was not a person. It was my bank, and the branch manager, James Pritchard, a man I had never met and will never forget, spoke to me at 4:47 in the morning with my 4-hour-old daughter on my chest, and he said 7 words that reorganized everything I thought I knew about my marriage. He said, "Did you authorize these transactions, Mrs. Calloway?" I said, "What transactions?" And he told me, and I looked at the empty chair beside my hospital bed, the chair where my husband had been sitting 2 hours earlier, before he said he was going to get coffee and had not come back, and I understood. Not everything, not yet, but enough. My name is Serena Calloway. I am 31 years old. I am a CPA at a mid-size accounting firm in Atlanta, and I want you to understand something about me before I tell you the rest of this story. I am the daughter of a factory floor manager from rural Georgia who ran 22 years of other people's work with nothing but discipline and dignity and the deep conviction that security does not arrive without a plan. I learned to read a balance sheet before I learned to drive. I understand money the way my parents never had the opportunity to understand it, not just how to earn it but how to protect it, how to grow it, how to make it mean something beyond the moment it arrives. I say this not to impress you. I say it because it matters for what comes next. Because the man who emptied our account on the night our daughter was born believed, on some level, that I would not be able to find it all. That I would not know where to look. That grief and exhaustion and new motherhood would make me soft enough to miss it. He did not know who he had married. I am going to tell you exactly what I found. Exactly what I built in the 6 weeks that followed. And exactly what happened at a Sunday dinner, a pot roast dinner, David's favorite, the recipe his own mother had given me. When my husband sat down at his own table and had absolutely no idea what was already waiting for him there. His name is David Calloway, and I want to tell you exactly who he was before I tell you what he did. Not to soften what is coming, but because the betrayal only carries its full weight when you understand what I believed I had. I met David at a work conference in Nashville 4 years before that October night. I was 26. He was 29, in medical equipment sales, the kind of job that requires constant travel and the particular personality of someone who is comfortable walking into rooms full of strangers and making them feel immediately that he is worth listening to. He was very good at this. I need you to remember that. It is the most important thing I can tell you about David Calloway, and it is also the reason I did not see what was coming. Because what was coming had been coming for 2 years and 3 months. And it had been coming quietly, patiently, in the specific way of someone who is very good at making people feel like the only person in the room. He sat next to me at the hotel bar on the second night of the conference. He introduced himself. We talked for 3 hours. By the end of that conversation I had told him things I did not normally tell people I had known for 3 hours, about my parents, about growing up in Georgia, about the specific ambition of someone who watched her mother stretch every dollar at a kitchen table and decided she was going to build something different. He listened in the way that made you feel your words were landing somewhere real. He asked questions that were genuinely good, specific, thoughtful, the kind that require you to actually know what you're asking about. I thought, this man pays attention. I thought, that is rare. I was right that it was rare. I was wrong about what it meant. We dated long distance for 8 months. He moved to Atlanta when his company offered him a regional position. 6 months later we moved in together. A year after that he proposed at the restaurant where we had our first proper date. No fanfare, no production, just the 2 of us and a ring he had chosen himself. That was exactly what I would have chosen. We were married the following spring. I was 28 years old. I believed I had chosen well. I had saved $11,462 over 3 years of marriage. I want you to understand what that number represented. That $11,462 was not an accident. It was the result of 3 years of deliberate, methodical saving, every freelance project taken on top of my regular job, every bonus deposited directly into the account instead of spent, every month where I chose the less expensive option not because I had to but because I had a goal. A down payment on a house. Our daughter's future. A safety net. 3 years of work. Gone in 4 transactions, over 3.5 hours, while I was in a hospital bed 6 blocks from the bank where it happened. Between 8 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. on the night of October 14th, while I was 18 hours into labor, he made 4 separate withdrawals. He told me he was getting something from the car. He said he would be right back. He was gone for 6 hours and 37 minutes. Our daughter was born at 12:31 a.m. He was not in the room. He walked in at 2:15 a.m. with a story about his car breaking down and his phone dying, and I was so exhausted and so full of the particular overwhelm of a woman who has just given birth that I held my daughter and I looked at his face and I believed him. I believed him for 2 hours and 47 minutes. And then James Pritchard called. I did not confront David that night. I want to be very clear about this decision and why I made it. I was 4 hours postpartum. My daughter was on my chest. My body was destroyed in the way that bodies are destroyed by 18 hours of labor, and I had just received information that was too large and too sharp to process safely in that state. So I did the thing I am best at. I made a plan. I told James Pritchard that I needed 24 hours. I asked him to flag the account, freeze any further outgoing transactions, and document everything. He said he could do that. He said he was sorry for what I was clearly going through. I thanked him and I hung up and I lay in that hospital bed with my daughter on my chest and I breathed. And underneath the breathing, in the part of me that has always been the factory manager's daughter who learned very young that security does not arrive without a plan, I began to build one. David came back at 5:30 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man performing a version of himself he needed me to believe in. He sat in the chair beside my bed. He looked at our daughter with what appeared to be genuine wonder. He took my hand. I let him take it. I looked at his face. I thought, you were 6 blocks away last night. You were at a bank 6 blocks away making 4 withdrawals while I was in this room. And right now you are holding my hand and looking at our daughter, and I am the only person in this room who knows both of those things are simultaneously true. I said, she looks like you around the eyes. He said, you think so? I said, yes. He smiled. I smiled back. And underneath the smile, in the part of me that he had never fully understood and was about to dramatically underestimate, I was already working. Here is what I knew at 5:30 in the morning in that hospital room and what I did not yet know. I knew he had taken the money. I knew the amount, the time, the 4 transactions. I knew he had lied about the car and the phone. What I did not know was where the money had gone. Whether this was the first time. What the real shape of our financial life looked like underneath the version I had been living inside. I was going to find out everything. But not that day. That day I was going home with my daughter. David drove us home at noon. He carried the car seat. He held the door. He made every gesture of a man performing new fatherhood with the commitment of someone who needs the performance to be believed. I watched him perform. I said nothing. I sat in the back seat next to my daughter and I watched the city move past the windows and I thought about everything I needed to do and in what order and how long it was going to take. My daughter slept. I planned. The first person I called was my sister Maya. Not my mother. My mother would have come over immediately and her presence would have made the focus I needed impossible. Maya is 4 years older than me and she has always had the specific quality of mind that a moment like this required. She does not catastrophize. She does not perform emotion when action is what the situation needs. And she has known me long enough to know the difference between when I need support and when I need logistics. I called her from the bathroom while David was downstairs in the kitchen making noise and performing usefulness. I told her everything in 6 minutes flat. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Okay. What do you need?" I said, "I need a forensic accountant. I need a divorce attorney. And I need you to tell no one, not mom, not anyone, for at least 2 weeks." She said, "The accountant will take me a day to find. The lawyer I can have for you by tomorrow. The 2 weeks I can do." I said, "Thank you." She said, "How are you actually?" I said, "I will tell you when this is finished." She said, "Okay." That was the conversation. That was enough. The woman Maya found was named Patricia Webb. 19 years of forensic accounting in Atlanta. My lawyer, Sandra Osei, 24 years of family law, the right person for exactly this kind of situation, which Diane had known before she even told me her name, said she had never seen anyone read a financial trail the way Patricia Webb read one. Like a language everyone else was only half fluent in. Patricia came to my kitchen table 8 days after my daughter was born. I told her what I knew and what I suspected. She looked at me with the particular calm of someone who has heard everything and said, "Give me access to every account you have knowledge of in 2 weeks." I gave her access. She came back in 11 days. She called on a Tuesday morning and said, "Are you somewhere you can talk privately?" I said yes. She said, "I need you to be sitting down." I sat down. And she told me. And I want you to understand what she told me, because this is the part of the story where everything I thought I was dealing with became something else entirely. The $11,462 was not the beginning. It was not even close to the beginning. David had been moving money for 2 years and 3 months, not from our joint account, but from an account I did not know existed. A business account opened in his name 18 months into our marriage, before my daughter was conceived, before I had any reason to be looking for something I didn't know to look for. He had been funneling a consistent percentage of his sales commissions into this account, month after month, not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough that over time it had built into something significant. The balance was $67,400. I sat with that number for a long time. Patricia said, "I need you to be prepared for what I am about to tell you next." Those words, "I need you to be prepared." I had told myself I was prepared. I was not prepared. She told me where the money had been going. An apartment. A 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood 20 minutes from our house, leased in his name, paid for monthly for the past 14 months. I said, "Who lives there?" She said, "Someone has been living there consistently, utilities at residential levels, grocery deliveries 3 times a week. I cannot give you a name without more investigation, but I can tell you it is not empty." I said, "How long?" She said, 14 months. 14 months. My daughter was 3 weeks old. My marriage was 4 years old. 14 months of an apartment 20 minutes from my house. I sat in my kitchen with my daughter sleeping in the next room and I thought about every evening David had worked late. Every weekend conference. Every night he had been somewhere that was not home, and he had had a reason, and I had accepted the reason because I had no cause not to. 14 months of reasons. 14 months of a life running parallel to mine, 20 minutes away, that I had never been shown. I called Sandra Osei that afternoon. She listened to everything Patricia had found and she did not pause before telling me exactly what to do and in what order. Document everything. Do not confront him. Do not change your behavior. Do not give him any indication that you know what you know. Every day that passes without him knowing you know is a day you can use to build the case you need. I said, "How long?" She said, 6 weeks minimum. Ideally 8. I looked at my daughter. I thought about 6 to 8 weeks of sitting across from David at dinner and asking about his day. I said, "Okay." Sandra said, "I know this is hard. What you do in the next 6 to 8 weeks will determine the outcome of the next several years of your life and your daughter's life. You have already done the hardest part. You know. Now it is about using what you know correctly." I said, "I understand." She said, "Good. Because from what Patricia has found we have the foundation of a settlement that will be very favorable to you. But only if you hold." I said, "I will hold. 6 weeks of holding looks like this. It looks like making dinner every evening and sitting across the table and asking about his day and listening to the answer. It looks like watching him check his phone with the slightly redirected attention I had noticed for months and had set down each time because I had trusted him, and now could not look at without knowing exactly what it contained. It looks like sleeping in the same bed and existing in the same house and being the version of yourself the situation requires, with the complete reliability of someone whose daughter's future depends on the performance. Because her future did depend on it. Week 2, his mother called. Patricia Calloway, 61 years old, retired teacher, the woman who had embraced me at our wedding with the genuine warmth of someone who meant it. She called on a Tuesday afternoon to ask how I was recovering. We talked for 20 minutes. She asked about the baby. She said David seemed tired, that new fatherhood was a lot for a man. I said, yes, it is a lot. I said, he has been wonderful. She said, he really has stepped up, hasn't he? I said, he really has. I hung up. I went and fed my daughter. I held her and I thought, 4 more weeks. I can do 4 more weeks. In the 3rd week I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, not definitive, just a restaurant receipt, but dated on a Tuesday evening when he had told me he had a client dinner, and itemized for 2 people. I held it for a long time. I photographed it. I sent it to Sandra. I put it back exactly where I found it. I made dinner. I asked about his day. In the 4th week he brought me flowers. Peonies, which he knew were my favorite. He put them on the kitchen counter and said, "You deserve more than you've been getting lately." I looked at the flowers. I thought about $67,400 in an account I didn't know existed. I thought about 14 months of an apartment 20 minutes from my house. I said, "Thank you. They're beautiful." He kissed my forehead and went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen with the peonies and I thought, 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks and every dollar will be accounted for. In the 5th week Maya came over on a Wednesday. She had been checking in every 3 days with texts that said only, "Still good?" And I had replied, "Still good." She sat at my kitchen table and she looked at my daughter and then at me, and she said, "You are the most frightening person I have ever loved." I said, 2 more weeks. She said, "I know." She went home. I made dinner. In the 5th week there was also the Sunday afternoon when he took a call in the backyard and I watched him through the kitchen window. The specific quality of his posture when it was not a work call, the way he turned slightly away from the house, the way he smiled at something that was said and then composed his face before turning back toward the door. I had the baby monitor in my hand. I went and checked on my daughter. I held. And then came the evening near the end of the 5th week when he sat across from me at dinner and looked at me with a look that was slightly too long, the look of someone running an assessment. He said, "Are you okay? You seem somewhere else lately." I said, "Just tired. New baby tired. You know how it is." He said, "Of course." He reached across the table and took my hand. I let him take it. I said, "I'm fine. Tell me about your day." He told me. I listened. I held. Week 6 arrived. Sandra called on a Monday morning and said, "We are ready." Patricia Webb had completed her full report. Then Sandra told me there was one more thing, something Patricia had found in the final days of the investigation that she needed me to be prepared for. I said, "Tell me." Sandra said, "The apartment lease has 2 names on it. His name and one other." I said, "Whose name?" She said, "Rebecca Calloway. His last name." I sat with that for longer than I want to admit, not because I didn't understand what it likely meant, but because understanding something and accepting it are 2 different processes and they do not always happen at the same speed. She was using his last name. On a lease. On utility accounts. For 14 months. I said, "Is she a relative?" Sandra said, "We ran everything we could. She is not a relative. She is 24 years old." I said, "Is there anything else?" Sandra said, "Yes." Patricia found evidence of a second bank account in Rebecca Calloway's name receiving regular transfers from David's business account for the past 8 months. The total transferred is $23,800. I am an accountant. I did the math without thinking about it because math is what I do when something is too large for the other parts of my brain to hold. Over 2 years and 3 months, $67,400 hidden in a business account I didn't know existed. 14 months of apartment payments. $23,800 transferred directly to her. And the $11,462 he took the night our daughter was born. Every dollar documented. Every transaction traced. Every piece of it billed in silence while I sat across from him at dinner and asked about his day. I said, "Sandra, how do we end this?" She said, "I have an idea. But I need to know how you want this to go." I said, "I want every dollar accounted for. And I want him to understand exactly how thoroughly he underestimated me." She said, "Then here is what we are going to do." David's mother called me the following Friday to ask if she could come for Sunday dinner. She said, "I feel like I haven't seen enough of the baby. Is that all right?" I said, "Of course. Come for dinner. Bring Gerald." Gerald was David's father, retired, 64, a quiet man who had always expressed care through presence rather than words. She said, "Wonderful. We'll be there at 6. I said, "We will see you then." I called Sandra the moment we hung up. I said, "His parents are coming for Sunday dinner. 6 o'clock. Tell me if this is the moment." Sandra was quiet for a moment. She said, "It depends on what you want the moment to look like." I said, "I want his parents to be there. I want them to hear it from me. I want them to understand what their son did on the night their granddaughter was born." Sandra said, "Then yes. This is the moment. I will have everything ready." I made pot roast, David's favorite, the recipe his mother had given me 2 Thanksgivings ago. I want you to understand why I made that specific meal on that specific night. Because what was about to happen at that table deserved to happen in the most ordinary setting possible. It deserved to land in the middle of a Sunday dinner like every other Sunday dinner, so that he had absolutely nowhere to hide from it. I set the table carefully. I put the baby monitor where I could hear it. I opened a good bottle of wine. His parents arrived at 6 exactly. Patricia came in and went straight to the baby, the way grandmothers do, with the complete prioritization of a small person over everyone else in the room. She held my daughter and made the sounds of someone entirely undone by something small and perfect. I watched her hold her granddaughter and I felt, in the middle of everything I was carrying, something that was genuinely sad. Because Patricia Calloway did not know. She was holding her granddaughter with complete love and complete ignorance of what her son had done on the night this child was born. She was about to find out. We sat down to dinner. The conversation was ordinary in the way Sunday family dinners are ordinary: the baby, the food, Gerald's golf game, a neighbor's renovation. David was relaxed in the particular way of someone who has no idea what is sitting at the table with him. He refilled the wine. He complimented the pot roast. He was the man his parents had always seen, and had always been allowed to see. I watched him be that man. I waited until the main course was finished and the plates were cleared and we were in the comfortable pause of a dinner that has gone well. That pause where people sit with their wine and the conversation slows and everything feels settled. I said, "I want to show you all something." I got up from the table. I went to the kitchen counter where my bag was sitting. I took out the folder. And I want to tell you what was inside it, because every page of it had been built in 6 weeks of silence, while I sat across from him at this same table and asked about his day. The first document was Patricia Webb's forensic accounting report. 41 pages. Every concealed transaction, every hidden deposit, every apartment payment, every transfer to Rebecca Calloway's account. 2 years and 3 months of a financial life I had never been shown. The second was the apartment lease, 2 names at the top, his and hers. The third was the bank statement from our joint account showing 4 withdrawals made between 8 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. on the night of October 14th. The fourth was a photograph, from Rebecca Calloway's public social media account, posted 8 months ago, a woman I did not recognize standing in a kitchen I did not recognize, wearing a ring I did not recognize, smiling at the camera. I placed the folder on the table. I sat back down. I said, David, I would like you to explain this to your parents. The table went completely silent. David looked at the folder. His face did something I had never seen his face do. It moved through several expressions in rapid succession, like a system running through its available responses and finding none of them adequate. Shock. Calculation. The beginning of something that wanted to be anger before it realized anger was not available here. And then underneath all of it, the specific expression of a person who has been found out completely and is now simply waiting to understand how completely. He said, Serena. I said, your parents are here. I think they should know what you did on the night your daughter was born. His mother said, David. What is this? He did not answer. I placed the bank statement in front of Gerald first, because Gerald was a quiet man who expressed care through presence, and who had always been, in the 4 years I had known him, the more honest of the two. I said, 4 withdrawals. Between 8 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. on October 14th. While I was in active labor in the hospital 6 blocks from the bank where these withdrawals were made. Gerald looked at the statement. Gerald looked at his son. David said, there is an explanation. I placed the lease in front of Patricia. I said, 2 names on this lease. Your son's name, and a woman using your family's last name. For 14 months, 20 minutes from this house. Patricia Calloway made a sound I had never heard her make before and hoped never to hear again. I placed Patricia Webb's report in the center of the table. I said, 2 years and 3 months. Every dollar documented. All 41 pages. The room was completely silent. The room was completely silent. My daughter made a sound from the monitor. A small, sleepy sound. The sound of someone who has no knowledge of what is happening in the room around her, and no need to. I stood up. I said, Sandra Osei will be in contact Monday morning. Everything has been filed. I am asking you to leave this house tonight, David. And I am asking Gerald and Patricia to stay until you have done so. I believe they deserve to understand what happened here. I believe that is the least I can give them. David stood up. He started to say something. His father said his name. Just his name. One word. In the voice of a man who has heard everything he needed to hear and has nothing to say to his son right now and needs his son to understand that. David stopped. He picked up his keys. He walked out of the house. The door closed. Patricia Calloway sat at my dining room table for 2 hours after her son left. Gerald sat beside her. I sat across from them with the baby monitor in my hand and the folder open between us, and I answered every question they asked as honestly as I could. Not because I owed them the full account, but because they were the grandparents of my daughter and the truth of what had happened was going to shape the next several years of all of our lives, and I believed they deserved to hold it clearly. Patricia asked, how long have you known? I said, 6 weeks. She said, 6 weeks. And you sat across from him at dinner for 6 weeks. I said, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how did you do that? I said, I thought about my daughter. Every time I sat across from him I thought about my daughter and what I was building for her, and I did what needed to be done. Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. She held it for a long time without saying anything. Gerald said, we are going to make this right. Whatever he refuses to do through the legal process, we are going to make it right. I looked at him. I said, you don't have. He said, yes, we do. The divorce took 7 months. Sandra Osei was exceptional in the way she had promised to be. The forensic accounting gave us everything we needed and more. David contested nothing in the end, not because he didn't want to, but because contesting any element of what Patricia Webb had documented would have required him to explain, in a legal setting, where all of it had gone and why, and his attorney apparently advised him that this was not a conversation he wanted to have in front of a judge. He settled. Every dollar was accounted for. The house was mine. The settlement included a trust account for my daughter's education, something Sandra had fought for with the specific persistence of someone who understood exactly what had been taken and exactly what it would cost to replace it. Gerald and Patricia called me every week for those 7 months. Not about David. About my daughter. About whether we needed anything. About whether they could come for Sunday dinner. 4 months after the dinner, Rebecca called me. I don't know how she found my number. She said, "I need you to know that he told me from the beginning that his marriage was over. That he was just waiting for the right time. I want you to know I didn't know about the baby. I didn't know about any of it." I said, "I believe you." She said, "I am so sorry." I said, "I know." She said, "He told me he loved me." I said, "He told me that too." A silence. Then she said, "I am so sorry." I said, "You were lied to the same way I was. The difference is that your name was on a lease and mine was in a delivery room. I am not going to make your situation harder than it already is. But I am also not going to be the person you call when you need to process this. Find your people. I have to take care of mine." She said, "Yes, of course. I understand." I hung up. I went and picked up my daughter. I sat by the window with her in the afternoon light and I thought about everything that had happened since the morning James Pritchard called. My daughter looked up at me. She had David's eyes. I had thought about this in the early weeks, what it would mean to look at her every day and see something of him. I had thought about it with dread, when everything was still raw. What I had not anticipated was that it would not matter. Because she also had my nose, my mother's mouth, and my father's hands, those wide capable hands that had run a factory floor for 22 years with nothing but discipline and dignity. She was mine. Completely, unconditionally, irreducibly mine. She was going to grow up in a house that was paid for, with a trust account for her education, with grandparents who came for Sunday dinner, with a mother who had sat across a table for 6 weeks and held and built and planned and waited. Who had found out her husband emptied their account the night she gave birth, and had not fallen apart. Had not confronted in the heat of it. Had not given him a single moment to manage what came next. Had simply, in the particular quiet way of the factory manager's daughter from Georgia who learned very young that security does not arrive without a plan, made one. James Pritchard sent me a handwritten note 3 months after the dinner. He said he had thought about that 4:47 a.m. call many times. He said he hoped things had worked out. He said he was sorry he had been the one to deliver that news in that moment. I wrote back. I said, "You were not the one who delivered bad news. You were the one who gave me the information I needed to make the right decisions. There is a difference. Thank you for calling. It was the most important call I received that year. My daughter and I are doing well." I meant every word. Because here is the truth I have thought about more times than I can count since that morning. If James Pritchard had not called, if the fraud detection system had not flagged those transactions, if I had found out a week later, or a month later, or in some way that gave David more time to move more money or make more arrangements, the outcome would have been different. Less controlled, less mine. The call gave me 6 weeks. And 6 weeks was everything. My daughter is 7 months old now. She sleeps through the night. She laughs at the ceiling fan. She reaches for things with those wide capable hands that look exactly like my grandfather's. She does not know what happened on the night she was born. She does not need to. She just needs me. And I am here. I am not going anywhere. Because here is the truth I have thought about more times than I can count since that morning. If James Pritchard had not called, if the fraud detection system had not flagged those transactions, if I had found out a week later, or a month later, or in some way that gave David more time to move more money or make more arrangements, the outcome would have been different. Less controlled, less mine. The call gave me 6 weeks. And 6 weeks was everything. My daughter is 7 months old now. She sleeps through the night. She laughs at the ceiling fan. She reaches for things with those wide capable hands that look exactly like my grandfather's. She does not know what happened on the night she was born. She does not need to. She just needs me. And I am here. I am not going anywhere. And if you are listening to this and you are somewhere in the part of the story before the plan, if you are in the part where you know something is wrong but you do not yet have the evidence or the words or the strength to do what comes next, I want you to hear this. The plan does not require you to be fearless. It requires you to be one day ahead of the thing that is trying to undo you. That is all. One day, one phone call, one folder, one Sunday dinner where you place what you know on the table and let it speak for itself. You do not have to feel ready. You just have to begin. And once you begin, once you actually start building, you will find that the woman who can sit across a table for 6 weeks and hold and wait and plan has been inside you the entire time. She was just waiting for you to need her badly enough. Every dollar was accounted for. The house is mine. My daughter is 7 months old and she laughs at the ceiling fan. And the man who thought grief and exhaustion would make me soft enough to miss what he'd done, he underestimated me for the last time at a Sunday pot roast dinner, while his own parents sat at the table and watched the folder land. I built it in silence. I always do.